The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty ranch yard as Tom wiped the sweat from his forehead. At 35 years old, he had been running the Circle K ranch for almost 3 years now, ever since his grandfather passed away and left him the sprawling property in Montana. What should have been a blessing felt more like a burden these days. Tom walked slowly toward the old wooden barn, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The ranch had seen better days. Paint was peeling off the fence posts, and several sections of fencing needed repair. The cattle were healthy enough, but managing 200 head of beef cattle was becoming impossible with his current crew. His grandfather, Old Pete, had built this ranch from nothing back in the 1960s. Pete was a tough man who believed in hard work and traditional ways. Tom grew up listening to his grandfather's stories about the ranch, especially the ones about hiring help. Pete always said the same thing: ranch work is man's work. Tommy, I tried hiring women a few times over the years and it never worked out. They either couldn't handle the physical demands or caused too much drama with the other hands. Tom had taken those words to heart. In his mind, cattle ranching required strength, endurance, and a certain toughness that he believed only men possessed. It wasn't that he disliked women, he just thought they belonged in different roles. His own mother had been perfectly happy managing the household and helping with the books, never getting involved with the actual cattle work. The ranch employed 4 full-time hands when Tom first took over. There was Bill, the foreman who had worked for Old Pete for 15 years. Then there were 3 younger guys who handled the daily cattle operations. Everything seemed to be running smoothly until 6 months ago when problems started piling up. First, one of the younger hands quit to take a job in the oil fields where the pay was better. Then another one left to get married and move closer to his wife's family. Tom managed to find replacements, but they weren't nearly as experienced. Ranch work wasn't just about being strong. It required knowledge about cattle behavior, understanding the land, and knowing how to handle equipment properly. The real crisis came last week when Bill, his trusted foreman, walked into Tom's office and dropped a bombshell. "I'm retiring, Tom," Bill said, hanging his hat on the hook by the door. "My wife wants to move closer to our grandkids in Arizona, and honestly, my back can't take much more of this work." Tom felt his stomach drop. Bill wasn't just his foreman, he was his mentor and the person who really kept the ranch running smoothly. "When?" Tom asked, hoping he'd have time to find a replacement. "End of the month," Bill replied. "I know it's short notice, but this opportunity came up sudden-like." That gave Tom exactly 2 weeks to find someone who could manage his cattle operation, supervise the remaining hands, and help make the tough decisions that kept the ranch profitable. In a small Montana town, experienced ranch foremen didn't grow on trees. Tom immediately called the local employment agency. "I need a ranch foreman," he told Linda, the woman who ran the office. "Someone with at least 10 years of experience managing cattle operations. Must be able to work long hours, handle equipment, and supervise other workers." "That's a tall order, Tom," Linda said. "Good foremen are hard to find these days. Most of the experienced ones already have steady jobs." "I don't care what it costs," Tom replied. "I need someone reliable." "But listen, Linda, I want to be clear about something. I need real ranch hands, no women. This isn't discrimination, it's just practical. Ranch work is too demanding, and I can't afford to have problems with my crew." Linda was quiet for a moment. "Tom, I have to tell you that legally I can't exclude applicants based on gender. I understand the legal stuff," Tom said. "Just make sure whoever you send me can actually do the job. I'm talking about moving cattle in all weather, fixing fences, operating heavy machinery. I need someone who can handle the physical demands." Over the next week, Linda sent him 3 candidates. The first was a young man fresh out of agricultural college who had book learning but had never actually worked a real ranch. The second was an older guy with experience, but he wanted twice what Tom could afford to pay. The third seemed promising until Tom discovered he had a drinking problem. As the days passed, Tom grew more desperate. Bill's last day was approaching fast, and the spring roundup was coming up. Without a good foreman, Tom would have to handle everything himself while also managing the business side of the ranch. He was already working 16-hour days. The cattle sensed something was different too. Cows are smart animals, smarter than most people realize. They knew the routines, knew who was supposed to be feeding them and checking on them. With the crew short-handed and stressed, the cattle were becoming more difficult to manage. Tom's neighbor, Jake Rodriguez, stopped by one evening as Tom was trying to fix a broken water trough by himself. Jake owned the ranch next door and had been in the business for 20 years. "You look like hell, Tom," Jake said, leaning against his truck. "What's going on?" Tom explained his situation while continuing to work on the trough. "I just can't find anyone qualified. Linda at the agency says there aren't many experienced people looking for work right now." "Have you thought about expanding your search?" Jake asked. "Maybe looking beyond just the traditional candidates?" Tom looked up from his work. "What do you mean?" "Well, I've heard there are some good hands working ranches over in Wyoming and Colorado. Might be worth posting the job in a wider area." "I can't afford to relocate someone," Tom said. "Besides, I need someone who understands Montana ranching. Different climate, different challenges." Jake nodded but seemed like he wanted to say something else. Instead, he helped Tom finish fixing the trough and headed home. That night, Tom sat in his grandfather's old office, looking through the ranch's financial records. The numbers weren't good. Without proper management, productivity was down. He was losing money on feed costs because the cattle weren't being moved to fresh pasture efficiently. Equipment repairs were piling up because there wasn't enough manpower to maintain everything properly. Tom picked up a framed photo from the desk. It showed him with his grandfather when he was about 12 years old. They were standing next to Old Pete's favorite horse, both wearing matching cowboy hats. Old Pete had his hand on Tom's shoulder, and both of them were grinning at the camera. "What would you do, Grandpa?" Tom whispered to the photo. He remembered Old Pete's advice about hiring. "Look for someone who knows cattle, Tommy. Someone who respects the animals and understands the land. Everything else can be taught." But then he also remembered the other stories. The time Old Pete hired a woman who quit after 2 weeks because the work was too hard. Another woman who caused problems between the male workers. A female veterinarian who Old Pete claimed was too emotional to make tough decisions about sick animals. Tom had grown up believing these stories without question. In his world, men did the heavy lifting, the dangerous work, the decision-making. Women handled different responsibilities. It wasn't meant to be disrespectful, it was just the way things worked. As he prepared for bed that night, Tom made a decision. Tomorrow he would call Linda again and make his requirements even clearer. He needed someone strong enough to wrestle a stubborn bull, experienced enough to read weather patterns, and tough enough to work in snow, rain, and blazing heat. In his mind, that description fit only one type of person. Tom had no idea that his old-fashioned thinking was about to be challenged in ways he never could have imagined. Sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people we think we understand the least turn out to surprise us the most. The Circle K Ranch was about to meet someone who would change everything, Tom thought. He knew about ranching, about strength, and about what it really meant to be tough enough for the job. 200 miles away in Wyoming, Maya Rodriguez sat in her small apartment above the feed store, staring at her laptop screen. The glow from the computer lit up her frustrated face as she scrolled through job listings for the third time that day. For the past 6 months, finding ranch work had become nearly impossible, and she was running out of options. Maya had grown up on ranches her entire life. Her father managed a large cattle operation in Texas, and she learned to ride before she could properly walk. By age 10, she was helping with roundups. By 15, she could rope cattle better than most grown men. Her weekends were spent at rodeo competitions where she dominated barrel racing and team roping events. After high school, Maya worked on various ranches across the Southwest. She spent 3 years in New Mexico learning about desert ranching, then moved to Colorado where she mastered high-altitude cattle management. Her skills were exceptional, but her gender made finding steady work challenging. The problem started 6 months ago at the Double Bar Ranch in Wyoming. Maya had been working there for almost 2 years as the assistant foreman. The owner, Mr. Peterson, was old-fashioned but fair. He judged people by their work, not their appearance. Maya thrived under his management and was being considered for promotion to head foreman. Everything changed when Peterson's son, Danny, returned from college with a business degree and big ideas about modernizing the ranch. Danny immediately made it clear he didn't approve of having women in leadership positions. He questioned every decision Maya made and undermined her authority with the other ranch hands. The final straw came during a particularly difficult calving season. Maya had been working 8-hour days helping deliver calves and treating sick cattle. She had successfully saved 3 difficult births that would have been lost without her intervention. Despite her outstanding performance, Danny convinced his father that Maya was too emotional for ranch management, and that her presence was distracting to the male workers. Peterson reluctantly let Maya go, though he privately told her it was one of the hardest decisions he'd ever made. "You're the best hand I've ever had," he said, shaking her hand on her last day. "But family business is complicated. I wish things were different." Since then, Maya had been blacklisted from most ranches in the area. Danny Peterson had connections throughout Wyoming and Colorado, and word spread quickly in the tight-knit ranching community. Potential employers would seem interested until they made a few phone calls, then suddenly the positions would be filled. Or the requirements would change. Maya's savings were nearly gone. She had been staying in this cheap apartment and working part-time at the feed store just to pay rent and buy groceries. Her truck needed repairs she couldn't afford, and her professional clothes were wearing thin. Most importantly, she missed the work she loved. Cattle ranching wasn't just her job. It was her passion and her identity. She clicked on another job posting, this one for a ranch foreman position in Montana. The Circle K Ranch was looking for someone with extensive cattle experience to manage their operation. The salary was decent, and the job description matched her skills perfectly. But Maya had learned to read between the lines of these postings. The listing emphasized physical demands and traditional ranch environment. In Maya's experience, these were often code words meaning they preferred male applicants. Still, this job seemed different. The posting focused heavily on cattle knowledge and experience rather than just strength requirements. Maya read the posting 3 more times, studying every word. The ranch owner was looking for someone who understood cattle behavior, could manage pasture rotation, and had experience with both breeding programs and market timing. These were exactly the skills Maya excelled at. Her expertise in cattle genetics and nutrition was superior to most ranch foremen she'd worked with. She started drafting a cover letter, then stopped. Her full name, Maya Rodriguez, would immediately identify her as female. Most employers would eliminate her application before even reading her qualifications. Maya stared at the screen, wrestling with her conscience. She had always prided herself on being honest and straightforward, but she was desperate. Her rent was due in 2 weeks, and she barely had enough money for groceries. More than that, she knew she could do this job better than almost anyone else who might apply. Her cattle knowledge was extensive, her work ethic was unmatched, and she had the leadership skills to manage a ranch crew effectively. Maya made a decision that went against every principle she had been raised with. Instead of using her full name, she would submit her application using only her initials, M. Rodriguez. It wasn't technically lying, just omitting information that shouldn't matter anyway. She carefully crafted her resume, highlighting her 10 years of ranch experience, her success in improving cattle productivity, and her knowledge of modern ranching techniques. She described how she had increased calf survival rates by 15% at her previous job and had implemented rotation grazing that improved pasture health significantly. Her cover letter focused purely on professional qualifications. She wrote about her experience managing crews during difficult weather conditions, her ability to make quick decisions during emergencies, and her understanding of ranch economics. She mentioned specific cattle breeds she had worked with and technical knowledge about nutrition and veterinary care. Maya submitted the application at 2 a.m., then immediately regretted it. She had never misrepresented herself before, and the deception felt wrong. But she told herself she would prove her worth through her work, not her gender. If she could just get an interview, she could demonstrate that she was the right person for the job. 3 days later, her phone rang. Maya was stocking feed bags when she saw an unknown Montana number on her screen. Her heart started racing as she answered. "This is M. Rodriguez," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Hi there, this is Tom Williams from the Circle K Ranch. I got your application for the foreman position, and I'm impressed with your experience. Are you available to talk about the job?" Maya stepped outside the feed store to take the call. Tom's voice was friendly but businesslike. He asked detailed questions about her cattle experience, her management style, and her approach to problem solving. Maya answered honestly, drawing on her extensive knowledge and real-world experience. "You sound like exactly what I'm looking for," Tom said after 20 minutes of conversation. "How soon could you be available for an in-person interview?" Maya's mind raced. Montana was a 12-hour drive from her current location. Her truck might not make the trip, and she couldn't afford a hotel, but this was the best opportunity she'd had in months. "I could be there this weekend," she said. "Perfect. How about Saturday morning? Come prepared to spend the day. I'd like you to see the operation and meet some of the cattle. Ranch work is hands-on, and I want to make sure you're comfortable with our setup." As they discussed details, Maya felt both excitement and anxiety. Tom seemed genuinely interested in her qualifications and experience. He asked intelligent questions about cattle management and seemed impressed with her knowledge. But she knew that everything would change once he saw her. Maya had faced this situation before. Phone interviews went well, but in-person meetings often ended quickly once employers realized she was a woman. Some were polite but firm. Others were openly hostile. A few had made comments about her appearance or questioned whether she could handle real ranch work after hanging up. Maya sat in her truck for a long time, staring at the mountains in the distance. She had two choices. She could call Tom back and explain the situation, probably losing the opportunity, or she could drive to Montana and face whatever happened. Maya thought about her father, who had always taught her to stand up for herself. She thought about all the cattle she had saved, all the successful roundups she had led, and all the ranches where she had improved operations. Her gender had never affected her ability to do the work. She made her decision. Maya would drive to Montana, face Tom Williams honestly, and prove that she was the best candidate for the job. If he was the kind of person who would judge her by her gender rather than her abilities, then she didn't want to work for him anyway. But deep down, Maya hoped Tom would be different. She hoped he would see her skills and experience and give her a fair chance. Maya packed her best interview clothes, checked her truck's oil, and started planning for the most important job interview of her life. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp Montana breeze and clear blue skies. Tom stood on his front porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the gravel road that led to his ranch. He had been up since 5 a.m., feeding cattle and making sure everything looked presentable for his interview with M. Rodriguez. Tom felt cautiously optimistic about this candidate. Their phone conversation had gone better than any of the previous interviews. M. Rodriguez clearly understood cattle management, asked intelligent questions about the ranch's breeding program, and seemed genuinely interested in the long-term success of the operation. Most importantly, this person had the kind of extensive experience that Tom desperately needed. The ranch hands were curious about the new potential foreman. Carlos, one of the remaining workers, had been helping Tom with extra responsibilities since Bill left. "When's this new guy supposed to show up?" Carlos asked as they finished the morning feeding. "Should be here any minute," Tom replied, checking his watch. "From what we talked about on the phone, he sounds like he really knows his stuff. 10 years of experience, worked ranches in 4 different states." A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, growing larger as a pickup truck approached the ranch entrance. Tom straightened his shirt and walked toward the main gate. This was it, hopefully the solution to all his management problems. The truck pulled into the yard and parked near the barn. Tom could see the driver gathering papers from the passenger seat, probably the resume and references they had discussed. The morning sun created a glare on the windshield, making it difficult to see clearly inside the cab. The driver's door opened, and Tom started walking forward with his hand extended for a welcoming handshake. "You must be M. Rodriguez," he called out. "Thanks for making the drive up here." A figure stepped out of the truck, and Tom's welcoming smile froze on his face. Long dark hair fell out from under a well-worn cowboy hat. The person turning toward him was definitely not the man he had expected to meet. Maya stood beside her truck, holding her resume in one hand and her hat in the other. She was dressed in clean jeans, work boots, and a button-down shirt, the same professional ranch attire she would wear to any job interview. Her long hair was neatly braided, and she looked directly at Tom with confident, intelligent eyes. Maya Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand. "We spoke on the phone about the foreman position." Tom stared at her outstretched hand without taking it. His mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. The voice on the phone had been deeper, more neutral. He had never questioned whether M. Rodriguez might be a woman. "You single quotes re Tom started, then stopped. He could feel heat rising in his cheeks, partly from embarrassment and partly from anger. "You said you were M. Rodriguez." "I am M. Rodriguez," Maya replied calmly. "Maya Rodriguez?" "I never said I was a man, Mr. Williams." Tom's expression hardened. He felt like he had been tricked, deceived in some elaborate scheme. All those conversations about cattle management, all his excitement about finally finding a qualified candidate, it had all been based on a misunderstanding. "This is ridiculous," Tom said, his voice getting louder. "I specifically told the employment agency that I needed a real ranch hand, someone who could handle the physical demands of this job." Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Williams, I understand there might be some confusion, but I assure you I can handle any physical demands this job requires. My resume shows 10 years of successful ranch management experience." She held out her resume, but Tom didn't take it. Instead, he looked her up and down in a way that made Maya feel like he was evaluating livestock rather than a potential employee. "Look, Miss Rodriguez, I'm sure you're a nice person, but this job isn't for you. We're talking about managing 200 head of cattle, working in all weather conditions, handling 1,000-pound animals that can be dangerous. This isn't some petting zoo operation." Maya felt her temper starting to rise, but she forced herself to remain professional. She had faced this kind of attitude before, and she knew that getting emotional would only reinforce his prejudices. "Mr. Williams, I've worked with cattle operations twice this size. I've delivered calves in blizzards, treated sick animals in 100-degree heat, and managed crews of ranch hands who initially doubted my abilities. My previous employer increased productivity by 20% during my time there." Tom shook his head dismissively. "I don't care what some other ranch let you do. This is serious business. When a bull gets aggressive or a horse throws you, I need someone who can handle the situation. I can't afford to have someone get hurt because they weren't strong enough for the job." The conversation was attracting attention from the other ranch workers. Carlos had stopped his work to watch the exchange, along with 2 other hands who were supposed to be repairing fence posts. Maya noticed their stares and realized this was becoming a public humiliation. "I understand your concerns about safety," Maya said, trying one more time to salvage the situation. "Perhaps we could start with a trial period? I could work for a week without pay, just to demonstrate my capabilities." Tom's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "A week? Lady, this isn't a game. When problems happen on a ranch, they happen fast and they happen hard. I can't risk my cattle or my business on some experiment." Maya's professional composure finally cracked. "Mr. Williams, with all due respect, you haven't even looked at my qualifications. You're rejecting me based on assumptions about what I can or can't do, not on my actual experience or abilities." "I'm rejecting you because I know what this job requires," Tom shot back. "I grew up on this ranch. My grandfather built this place from nothing, and he tried hiring women a few times. It never worked out. They either couldn't handle the physical work or they caused problems with the crew. So you're saying that because other women failed, I automatically will too? Maya asked. That's not logical and it's certainly not fair. Tom's face was getting redder. Fair? You want to talk about fair? It's not fair that you misled me into thinking you were qualified for this position. It's not fair that you wasted my time when I'm desperate to find real help. Maya looked around at the ranch, the well-maintained cattle, the sturdy buildings, the good pasture land. This was exactly the kind of operation she wanted to work on. She could see potential improvements that could increase efficiency and profitability. But she could also see that Tom's mind was completely closed to the possibility. Mr. Williams, Maya said quietly, I think you're making a mistake, but I can't force you to give me a fair chance. She turned and walked back toward her truck, her head held high despite the crushing disappointment. The 12-hour drive from Wyoming had been for nothing. Her last hope for steady employment was walking away with her. Tom watched her go, feeling a mixture of anger and something else he couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was guilt, but he pushed that feeling down. He had made the right decision. Ranch work was dangerous and demanding, and he couldn't afford to take risks with someone who wasn't physically capable of handling emergencies. Maya reached her truck and opened the door, then paused and looked back at Tom. You know, Mr. Williams, your grandfather might have been wrong about women ranch hands. But I guess you'll never know, will you? She climbed into her truck and started the engine. As she drove away, Maya felt tears of frustration building up behind her eyes. She had come so close to landing the perfect job, only to be rejected without even a chance to prove herself. Tom stood in his driveway, watching the dust settle from Maya's departure. Carlos approached him cautiously. Boss, wasn't that the person you were so excited about, the one with all the experience? Tom nodded grimly. Same person, but it doesn't matter now. We'll keep looking for the right candidate. As he walked back toward the house, Tom tried to push away the nagging feeling that he might have just made a serious error in judgment. He told himself he had done the right thing, the practical thing. But Maya's parting words kept echoing in his head. Little did Tom know that this wasn't the last he would see of Maya Rodriguez. Sometimes the people we reject have a way of proving us wrong when we least expect it. 3 days after rejecting Maya, Tom was beginning to realize just how desperate his situation had become. Without a foreman, he was trying to manage everything himself while his inexperienced crew struggled with even basic tasks. The spring weather had been unpredictable, and the cattle were becoming restless. Maya hadn't left Montana immediately after the failed interview. She had driven to a small campground about 20 miles from the Circle K ranch, needing time to figure out her next move. Her truck needed repairs before she could make the long drive back to Wyoming, and she was almost out of money. The campground was cheap, and she could survive on canned beans and instant coffee for a few days while she decided what to do. From her campsite, Maya could see the weather changing. Dark clouds were building over the mountains, and the wind was picking up significantly. She had spent enough time in Montana to recognize the signs of a serious storm approaching. The local radio station confirmed her suspicions. A severe thunderstorm system was moving through the area, with possible hail and dangerous winds. Maya worried about the cattle at various ranches in the valley. Spring storms could be particularly deadly for livestock. Cattle often sought shelter in low areas that could become deadly during flash floods. Young calves were especially vulnerable to hail and cold rain. That afternoon, the storm hit with a violence that surprised even Maya. Thunder crashed overhead while lightning lit up the sky every few seconds. Rain fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to almost nothing. The wind howled through the trees around her campsite, bending them at dangerous angles. Maya huddled in her truck, listening to the weather radio. The storm was even worse than predicted. Hail the size of golf balls was reported in some areas. Several roads were already flooded, and emergency services were advising people to stay indoors. Tom was having the worst day of his ranching career. The storm had caught him completely off guard. His cattle had been in the south pasture when the weather hit, and now they were scattered across nearly 1,000 acres of rough terrain. The inexperienced hands were overwhelmed and scared. Carlos had some experience, but not with crisis management during severe weather. When the lightning started, Tom's prize bull, Thunder, had panicked and broken through the fence. The massive animal was worth $30,000 and was crucial to the ranch's breeding program. Even worse, Thunder had led about 50 other cattle through the gap, and they were now somewhere in the rough country beyond the south pasture. "Boss, we can't find them in this weather," Carlos shouted over the wind and rain. "It's too dangerous to ride out there with all this lightning." Tom knew Carlos was right, but he also knew that every minute the cattle spent exposed to this storm increased the chances of losing them permanently. Cattle caught in hailstorms could be injured or killed. If they took shelter in the wrong places, flash floods could drown them. And if they wandered too far into the wilderness, finding them could take weeks. "We have to try," Tom yelled back. "Thunder alone is worth more than I make in 6 months. And those other cattle represent years of breeding work." Tom saddled his most reliable horse, a steady mare named Star who had weathered many storms. Carlos and the other hands were preparing to follow him, though Tom could see the fear in their eyes. These were good men, but they lacked the experience to handle this kind of emergency. The search began badly and got worse quickly. The rain was so heavy that Tom could barely see 20 feet in any direction. Star was nervous about the lightning, shying at every thunder crack. The other horses were even more spooked, making it difficult for the inexperienced riders to control them. After 2 hours of searching, they had found only a handful of cattle. The animals they did locate were huddled together in a grove of trees, terrified and difficult to move. Tom realized that his crew simply didn't have the skills needed for this kind of rescue operation. "Carlos, take the others back to the barn," Tom finally shouted. "This is too dangerous for horses that aren't used to storms." "What about you, boss?" Carlos called back. "I'm going to keep looking for Thunder and the others. They've got to be in one of the ravines on the east side." Tom rode deeper into the rough country alone, following what he hoped were cattle tracks in the muddy ground. The terrain here was dangerous even in good weather: steep slopes, rocky outcroppings, and deep gullies that could trap both animals and riders. As he navigated a particularly treacherous slope, Star suddenly reared up. A massive dead tree struck by lightning came crashing down just yards in front of them. The horse bolted in panic, and Tom found himself fighting to stay in the saddle while trying to guide her away from more falling debris. That's when he heard it. The desperate bellowing of cattle in distress. The sound was coming from somewhere below him, in what he knew was a deep ravine that often flooded during heavy rains. Tom's heart sank as he realized what had probably happened. The cattle had sought shelter in the ravine, and now they were trapped as water levels rose. Tom tried to guide Star down the steep slope toward the sound, but the mare was too frightened. The combination of lightning, thunder, and the smell of panicked cattle was overwhelming her natural instincts. She kept backing away from the edge, refusing to descend into the dangerous terrain. Meanwhile, Maya had been monitoring the emergency radio channels from her campsite. She heard reports of livestock emergencies throughout the valley. Several ranches were reporting missing cattle, and there had been one injury when a ranch hand was thrown from a spooked horse. Maya knew she should stay put. This wasn't her problem anymore. Tom had made it clear that he didn't want her help or even her presence on his ranch. But she also knew that people and animals were in danger, and she had skills that could help save lives. When she heard a radio report about a rider searching alone for missing cattle near the Circle K ranch, Maya made a decision that went against her better judgment. She saddled her horse Luna, who was tied to her truck trailer, and headed out into the storm. Luna was a remarkable horse, part quarter horse, part Mustang, with an intelligence and courage that Maya had never seen in another animal. They had worked together for 5 years, and the horse seemed to understand Maya's thoughts almost before she had them. Most importantly, Luna was completely unafraid of storms. Maya rode toward the Circle K ranch, following the sound of cattle in distress. Her superior horsemanship skills and Luna's steady nerves allowed them to navigate terrain that would have been impossible for most riders in these conditions. She found Tom about a mile from his ranch headquarters, struggling with his panicked horse while trying to reach the cattle trapped in the flooding ravine. Maya could see immediately what needed to be done, but she also knew that appearing now would be awkward. Given their previous encounter, Tom looked up and saw a rider approaching through the rain. At first, he thought Carlos had disobeyed orders and come back to help. But as the figure got closer, he realized it was Maya, the woman he had rejected just 3 days ago. "What are you doing here?" Tom shouted over the storm. "Your cattle are trapped in that ravine," Maya called back, pointing toward the sound of bellowing animals. "The water's rising fast. We need to get them out now, or you're going to lose them all." Tom looked at the steep, muddy slope leading down to the ravine, then at his frightened horse, then at Maya sitting calmly on her steady mount. He was facing the loss of his most valuable animals and possibly his entire ranch operation. His pride told him to send Maya away, but his desperation was stronger. "Can you actually get down there?" he asked. Maya was already guiding Luna toward the treacherous descent. "Follow me if you can," she called back. "But stay back until I signal. Too many riders will spook them more." Tom watched in amazement as Maya and her horse moved down the steep slope like they were dancing. Luna seemed to find footing where none existed, and Maya rode with a confidence and skill that Tom had rarely seen. Within minutes, they had disappeared into the ravine where the cattle were trapped. For the first time since the storm began, Tom felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, his cattle could be saved after all. Maya disappeared into the ravine while Tom waited anxiously at the top, straining to hear anything over the roaring storm. The rain was still falling heavily, and he could see muddy water rushing down the slope toward where his cattle were trapped. Every minute that passed meant the water was getting deeper and more dangerous. From below, Maya's voice cut through the storm noise. "I can see them. Thunder and about 40 others are trapped on a small piece of high ground, but the water is rising fast." Tom felt his stomach drop. Thunder was his prize bull, worth more than his truck and tractor combined. But more than money, these cattle represented years of careful breeding work. Losing them would set his ranch back a decade. "Can you get them out?" Tom shouted down. "Working on it," Maya called back. "But I need you to get your crew ready to receive them at the north gate. They're going to come out fast and scared." Tom rode hard back toward the ranch headquarters, his mind racing. Maya had been down there for less than 5 minutes, and she already had a plan. His own crew had been wandering around in circles for hours. Without accomplishing anything meaningful, he found Carlos and the other hands huddled in the barn, waiting out the storm. "Carlos, get everyone mounted and ready at the north gate," Tom ordered. "Maya thinks she can drive the cattle out of the ravine, but we need to be ready to contain them." "Maya?" Carlos looked confused. "The woman from the interview? What's she doing here? Just get ready," Tom snapped, not wanting to explain the complicated situation. Meanwhile, Maya was working with a level of skill and calm that came from years of experience in dangerous situations. Luna picked her way carefully through the rushing water, finding solid footing on rocks and fallen logs. Maya could see the cattle clearly now. They were standing on a small island of higher ground that was shrinking by the minute. Thunder, the massive bull, was in the center of the group, his eyes wide with fear, but still trying to protect the smaller animals around him. Maya had seen this behavior before. Bulls often became protective during emergencies, which could make them either helpful leaders or dangerous obstacles. Maya began talking to the animals in a low, steady voice that somehow carried over the storm. Noise. This was something she had learned from her father. Cattle responded to calm, confident voices even in crisis situations. The technique required patience and understanding of animal psychology that couldn't be taught in books. "Easy, Thunder," she called to the bull. "I know you're scared, but I'm here to help. We're going to get you and your friends out of here." Slowly, Maya guided Luna closer to the trapped cattle. She pulled out her rope, not to catch the animals, but to use as a guiding tool. With expert precision, she began using the rope to gently Encourage the cattle to move toward higher ground that led out of the ravine. The process was delicate and dangerous. One wrong move could panic the animals and cause them to scatter in different directions, making rescue impossible. Maya had to read each animal's body language and respond accordingly. Some cattle were ready to follow her lead, while others were too frightened to move. Thunder was the key. As the dominant animal, his behavior would influence the entire group. Maya focused on gaining his trust first. She positioned Luna where Thunder could see her clearly and continued talking in that steady, reassuring voice. "That's it, big guy," Maya said as Thunder took a tentative step toward her. "You know I'm trying to help." Show the others it's safe to follow. One by one, the cattle began moving toward Maya. She used Luna to block certain paths and open others, essentially herding the animals toward the safest route out of the ravine. It was like a complex dance performed in the middle of a dangerous storm. The most challenging part came when they reached the steep slope leading out of the ravine. The muddy ground was slippery and unstable. Several cattle slipped and slid, but Maya was always in the right position to guide them back to safety. Tom watched from above as the first cattle emerged from the ravine. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Maya was managing a complex rescue operation that would have challenged even the most experienced ranch hands. Her timing was perfect, her positioning was strategic, and most importantly, she was keeping the animals calm despite the terrifying conditions. Thunder appeared at the top of the slope, followed by the rest of the herd. They were muddy and exhausted, but alive and uninjured. Maya and Luna brought up the rear, both of them covered in mud, but moving with the same steady confidence they had shown throughout the rescue. "How did you do that?" Tom asked as Maya approached, genuine amazement in his voice. "Experience," Maya replied simply. "And a good horse. Luna deserves most of the credit." Tom looked at the rescued cattle, then back at Maya. 3 days ago, he had dismissed her as unqualified for ranch work. Now she had just saved his most valuable animals using skills that none of his current crew possessed. The storm was beginning to weaken, but there was still work to be done. The rescued cattle needed to be checked for injuries and moved to safe shelter. The broken fence needed temporary repairs to prevent other animals from wandering into danger. Maya seemed to anticipate every need. She quickly examined Thunder for injuries, running her hands along his legs and checking his breathing. "He's fine," she told Tom. "Scared, but not hurt. The others look good too, but you should have your vet take a look at them tomorrow." "Maya," Tom said quietly, "I owe you an apology. And probably a lot more than that." Maya was already moving toward the broken fence, pulling tools from her saddlebags. "Apologies can wait," she said. "Right now, we need to make sure no other animals get into that ravine." For the next 3 hours, Maya worked alongside Tom and his crew to secure the ranch and tend to the cattle. Tom watched her carefully, noting how she handled every task with competence and efficiency. She repaired fence with the skill of a carpenter, treated a minor cut on one calf with the knowledge of a veterinarian, and organized the crew's efforts like an experienced manager. Carlos pulled Tom aside at one point. "Boss, this woman knows more about cattle than anyone I've ever worked with." "Where did you find her?" Tom felt embarrassment wash over him. "She applied for the foreman job. I turned her down." Carlos stared at him in disbelief. "You turned her down? Why?" Tom couldn't bring himself to admit the real reason. "I made a mistake," he said simply. As the evening wore on and the crisis passed, Maya began preparing to leave. She had done what needed to be done, but she knew her presence was temporary. Tom had made his feelings clear during their first meeting. "Maya, wait," Tom called as she loaded her gear back onto Luna. "I need to ask you something." Maya stopped but didn't turn around. "What? Would you consider staying?" "At least for a few days. I clearly need help managing this place, and after what you did today. Tom's voice trailed off. Maya turned to face him, studying his expression carefully. "Mr. Williams, 3 days ago you told me I wasn't qualified for ranch work. You said women couldn't handle the physical demands or the pressure. What's changed?" Tom looked at his rescued cattle, then at the expertly repaired fence, then back at Maya. "Everything. he said honestly. I was wrong about everything. Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. She had proven her point, demonstrated her abilities beyond any doubt, but she had also seen Tom's character during the crisis. Despite his prejudices, he had swallowed his pride and asked for help when his animals were in danger. That showed a willingness to put practical needs above personal biases. 1 week, Maya said finally. Trial period, just like I suggested before? But this time I want the same respect you'd give any qualified ranch hand. Tom nodded eagerly. Absolutely, and Maya, thank you. You saved my ranch today. As they shook hands, Tom realized that this was just the beginning of a partnership that would change everything about how he thought about ranching, about leadership, and about the assumptions he had carried his entire life. The first morning of Maya's trial week began before sunrise. Tom arrived at the barn to find Maya already there, checking on the cattle that had been rescued from the storm. She was examining Thunder carefully, running her hands along his legs, to make sure he hadn't developed any soreness from his ordeal in the ravine. How is he? Tom asked, genuinely concerned about his prize bull. He's doing well, Maya replied, scratching Thunder behind the ears. The massive animal, who usually only tolerated handling from Tom himself, was completely relaxed under Maya's touch. No swelling, no heat in his joints. He's a tough one. Tom watched in amazement as Thunder actually leaned into Maya's touch, almost like a giant dog seeking attention. The bull had never shown that kind of trust with anyone else, including Tom's previous foreman who had worked with the animal for years. Maya moved through the barn systematically, checking each rescued animal with the thoroughness of a veterinarian. She noted every small cut, every sign of stress, and made mental notes about which animals needed special attention over the next few days. I'd like to change their feeding schedule temporarily, Maya told Tom as they walked toward the main pasture. After a trauma like yesterday, their digestive systems will be sensitive. Smaller, more frequent meals will help them recover faster. Tom nodded, impressed by her attention to detail. These were considerations that wouldn't have occurred to him or his crew. Whatever you think is best. Over the next few days, Maya began implementing changes that transformed the ranch's daily operations. She reorganized the feeding routine to be more efficient, saving almost 2 hours of work each day. She identified several sections of fence that needed repair before they became major problems. Most importantly, she began teaching the crew techniques they had never learned before. Carlos was the first to embrace Maya's leadership. During the second day, he approached her while she was examining the ranch's pasture rotation schedule. Maya, I've been working ranches for 8 years, but I've never seen anyone handle cattle the way you do, Carlos said. Yesterday, when you got Thunder to move, just by talking to him, how did you learn that? Maya smiled. My father taught me that cattle are a lot smarter than most people think. They can read your energy, your confidence level, even your intentions. If you approach them with respect and understanding, they'll usually cooperate. She spent time with each crew member, patiently teaching techniques that improved both safety and efficiency. She showed them how to read cattle body language to predict behavior, how to position themselves to guide animals without force, and how to use their voices as tools for managing livestock. Tom watched these training sessions with growing admiration. Maya wasn't just skilled herself. She was a natural teacher who could pass on knowledge in ways that made sense to working cowboys. His crew was learning more in 3 days than they had in the previous 3 months. The real test came on Thursday, when a neighboring rancher, Pete Johnson, stopped by unexpectedly. Pete owned one of the largest operations in the county and had a reputation for being old-fashioned in his views about ranch management. Tom, I heard you hired a new foreman, Pete said, climbing out of his truck. Figured I'd stop by and meet him. Tom felt his stomach tighten. He knew Pete's opinions about women in ranch work were even stronger than his own had been. Actually, Pete, I should explain something. Before Tom could finish, Maya appeared from behind the barn, leading Thunder on a halter. She was taking the bull to a different pasture for breeding purposes, a task that required both skill and courage. Since Thunder weighed over 2,000 pounds and could be unpredictable, Pete stared in disbelief. That's your new foreman? A woman? Tom straightened up, suddenly feeling protective of Maya. That's Maya Rodriguez, and yes, she's my new ranch manager. Pete shook his head. Tom, you've lost your mind. Women don't belong managing cattle operations. It's too dangerous, too demanding. As if to prove Pete's point wrong, Thunder suddenly balked at crossing a small creek. Most handlers would have either forced the animal or given up, but Maya simply stopped and began talking to the bull in that calm, steady voice Tom had heard during the storm rescue. Within minutes, Thunder was following Maya across the creek like a giant pet. Pete watched the entire interaction with his mouth hanging open. I've never seen Thunder that cooperative with anyone, Tom said quietly. Maya has a gift with animals that I've never encountered before. Maya finished moving Thunder to his new pasture and walked back toward Tom and Pete. She nodded politely to the visiting rancher but continued with her work, checking the water systems in the nearby cattle pens. Pete, let me show you what Maya has accomplished in just 4 days, Tom said. Leading his neighbor on a tour of the ranch. Tom pointed out the improved efficiency in the feeding areas, the proactive fence repairs, and the better organization of equipment and supplies. Most impressive was the condition of the cattle themselves. They seemed calmer, healthier, and more content than Tom had seen them in months. She reorganized our entire operation, Tom explained. Productivity is up, feed costs are down, and my crew is learning techniques they never knew existed. Pete listened with growing interest, though he still seemed skeptical. I'll admit the operation looks good, but management is about more than just daily tasks. What happens when you face a real crisis? Tom almost laughed. Pete, she saved my entire herd during that storm on Sunday. 41 head of cattle, including Thunder, were trapped in a flooding ravine. My crew couldn't handle it, but Maya rode down there alone and brought every single animal out safely. Pete's expression began to change. He had heard about the storm damage throughout the valley, and he knew how dangerous those rescue operations could be. The conversation was interrupted when Carlos approached looking concerned. Boss, we've got a problem in the south pasture. One of the cows is having trouble calving, and it looks complicated. Tom felt his chest tighten. Difficult births were dangerous for both mother and calf, requiring experience and quick decision-making. His previous foreman had handled these situations, but Tom wasn't sure how Maya would perform under this kind of pressure. Let's go, Maya said immediately. Heading toward the barn to gather medical supplies, Pete followed along, curious to see how this situation would unfold. Tom found himself holding his breath as they approached the distressed cow. Maya examined the animal quickly but thoroughly, her hands gentle but confident as she assessed the situation. The calf is positioned wrong, she explained to Tom. I need to reposition it manually before we lose both mother and baby. What followed was 45 minutes of careful, skilled work that impressed both Tom and Pete. Maya's knowledge of cattle anatomy and birthing procedures was extensive. She worked with patience and precision, talking constantly to the mother cow to keep her calm during the stressful procedure. When the calf finally emerged healthy and breathing, Pete shook his head in amazement. In 30 years of ranching, I've seen maybe 3 people handle a difficult birth that well. Maya was cleaning up her equipment, seemingly unaware of the impact her performance had made. The calf should be fine, she told Tom. I'll check on both mother and baby twice a day for the next week to make sure there are no complications. As they walked back toward the ranch headquarters, Pete pulled Tom aside. Where did you find her? He asked quietly. She applied for the foreman job through the employment agency, Tom admitted. I almost didn't hire her. Pete looked puzzled. Why not? She's obviously the most qualified person you could have found. Tom felt embarrassed telling the truth. Because she's a woman. I had the same prejudices you showed up with today. Pete was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Tom, I owe that young lady an apology. And I owe you credit for being smart enough to change your mind. As Pete prepared to leave, he asked Tom for Maya's contact information. I might have some work opportunities to discuss with her. If you're fool enough to let her go, I'd like first chance at hiring her. That evening, Tom found Maya in the barn, updating the ranch's breeding records with meticulous detail. Her organizational skills were as impressive as her animal handling abilities. "Maya, I need to ask you something," Tom said. "Are you planning to stay beyond this trial week?" Maya looked up from her paperwork. "That depends. Are you planning to offer me a permanent position?" Tom nodded emphatically. "Not just the foreman job. I want you as ranch manager, full partnership in decision-making, competitive salary, and complete authority over daily operations." Maya considered his offer carefully. "What changed your mind?" Tom thought about everything he had witnessed over the past 4 days. "You've revolutionized this operation in less than a week. My cattle are healthier, my crew is more skilled, and my ranch is more profitable. More than that, you've shown me that my assumptions about what makes a good rancher were completely wrong." Maya smiled. "Mr. Williams, I think we can work together." As they shook hands on the agreement, Tom realized that hiring Maya wasn't just the best business decision he had ever made. It was the beginning of a partnership that would challenge everything he thought he knew about ranching, leadership, and himself. 6 months had passed since Maya became the official ranch manager at Circle K. The operation was running smoother than it ever had, and Tom found himself relying on Maya's judgment more each day. What started as a professional partnership had gradually become something deeper, though neither of them had acknowledged it out loud. Maya had moved from her small campsite into the ranch's guest cabin, a modest but comfortable building that old Pete had originally built for visiting cattle buyers. She had transformed the space into a real home, adding plants on the windowsills and arranging her books on shelves that Tom had helped her build one weekend. Tom increasingly found excuses to spend time at the cabin discussing ranch business that could have easily been handled over the radio or during their regular morning meetings. Maya seemed to enjoy these conversations too, often making extra coffee and inviting him to sit on the small porch to watch the sunset after long days of work. Their working relationship had evolved into an easy partnership. Tom handled the business side of the ranch, dealing with buyers, managing finances, and maintaining relationships with suppliers. Maya managed all the day-to-day operations, from cattle care to crew supervision to pasture management. They made decisions together, and Tom had come to value Maya's input on every aspect of the ranch. The crew had fully accepted Maya's leadership. Carlos often said she was the best boss he had ever worked for, and the other hands frequently came to her with both work problems and personal issues. Maya had a way of listening that made people feel heard and respected, but it was the small moments that made Tom realize his feelings for Maya were changing. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes during lunch breaks. How she remembered that. He liked his coffee black and always had a cup ready when he arrived at the barn in the mornings. The gentle way she treated not just the cattle, but every living thing on the ranch, from the barn cats to the old dog that had belonged to his grandfather. Maya was becoming aware of her own changing feelings too. She noticed how Tom had started asking her opinion not just about ranch matters, but about everything from which truck to buy to what color to paint the barn. She appreciated how he had completely changed his attitudes about women in ranching, even becoming an advocate for other female ranch workers in the area. More than that, she had come to admire Tom's character. Despite his initial prejudices, he had been humble enough to admit his mistakes and change his thinking. He treated her as an equal partner, never taking credit for her ideas or undermining her authority with the crew. When neighboring ranchers made comments about his female foreman, Tom defended her abilities with genuine pride. The turning point came during a particularly difficult week in late fall. The cattle needed to be moved to winter pastures, a complex operation that required careful planning and flawless execution. The weather was unpredictable, with early snow threatening to complicate the roundup. Maya had been working 18-hour days to prepare for the move. She checked and rechecked every detail: the condition of the winter fencing, the water sources in the new pastures, the health of each animal that would make the journey. Tom watched her push herself to exhaustion. Worried about her, but knowing better than to suggest she slow down, on the second day of the roundup, disaster nearly struck. A section of old fence gave way just as they were moving the largest group of cattle through a narrow mountain pass. The animals scattered in panic, some heading toward dangerous cliff areas where they could fall and be seriously injured or killed. Tom was riding point when it happened, trying to guide the lead cattle through the pass. When the fence collapsed, his horse spooked and reared up, losing its footing on the rocky ground. Tom found himself thrown from the saddle, landing hard on the steep slope while his horse scrambled to safety. Maya saw the accident from her position at the rear of the herd. Without hesitation, she spurred Luna forward, racing through the scattered cattle to reach Tom. She found him conscious but dazed, with a deep cut on his forehead and obvious pain in his left shoulder. "Don't move," Maya said, quickly dismounting, to examine his injuries. "You might have a concussion, and that shoulder looks dislocated." Tom tried to sit up. "The cattle, they're scattering toward the cliffs. The cattle can wait," Maya said firmly, gently pushing him back down. "Carlos and the others can handle them. You're hurt." For the next hour, Maya stayed with Tom while Carlos and the crew rounded up the scattered animals. She used her radio to coordinate the rescue operation while simultaneously treating Tom's injuries. Her first aid skills were as competent as everything else she did. "How do you know so much about medical care?" Tom asked as Maya carefully cleaned the cut on his forehead. "You learn a lot of things when you grow up on remote ranches," Maya replied. "Sometimes the nearest doctor is 2 hours away, so you better know how to handle emergencies yourself." As Maya worked, Tom found himself studying her face with new awareness. Her concentration was complete as she tended to his injuries, her touch gentle but confident. In the fading afternoon light, with her hair escaping from under her hat and her eyes focused intently on helping him, Tom realized he was looking at the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. More than that, he was looking at someone who had just dropped everything to take care of him when he was hurt. Maya could have sent one of the crew members to help him while she continued managing the critical cattle operation. Instead, she had made his safety her first priority. "Maya," Tom said quietly. "Hmm?" she replied, still focused on bandaging his shoulder. "Thank you. Not just for this, but for everything. For saving my ranch, for making me a better person, for—" Tom paused, struggling with words that he had never said to any woman before. "For being you." Maya's hands stilled, and she looked up to meet his eyes. For a moment, the professional mask she usually wore slipped away, and Tom could see something vulnerable and uncertain in her expression. "Tom," she said softly, "we should probably get you to a doctor. That head injury might be more serious than it looks." But neither of them moved. They stayed there on the mountainside, looking at each other with a new understanding passing between them. The sounds of the cattle and crew working in the distance seemed far away. "I'm fine," Tom said, though he made no effort to get up. "Maya, I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, Carlos's voice crackled over the radio. "Boss, we've got all the cattle contained, but we need to make a decision about the route. The weather's changing fast." The moment was broken, but something fundamental had shifted between them. Maya helped Tom to his feet, and they worked together to complete the cattle move despite his injuries. Throughout the rest of the day, Tom was acutely aware of Maya's presence. The way she moved, the sound of her voice giving directions to the crew. That evening, after the cattle were safely settled in their winter pastures and the crew had been fed and housed for the night, Tom and Maya found themselves alone on the cabin porch. Tom's shoulder was in a sling, and the cut on his forehead was covered with a neat bandage that Maya had applied. "You scared me today," Maya said quietly, looking out at the stars beginning to appear in the clear mountain sky. "Scared you how?" Tom asked. Maya was quiet for a long moment. "I realized that this place, this work, this life, none of it would mean anything to me if something happened to you." Tom felt his heart racing. "Maya, are you saying what I think you're saying?" She turned to look at him, and in the soft light from the cabin windows, Tom could see the same feelings in her eyes that he had been struggling with for months. "I'm saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a job for me," Maya said. You stopped being just my boss, and this ranch stopped being just a place to work." Tom reached for her hand with his good arm. "I've been feeling the same way for months, but I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid that if I said something and you didn't feel the same way, I'd lose the best thing that ever happened to my ranch and to me." Mao smiled, the first completely unguarded smile Tom had ever seen from her. "Well, now you know." As they sat together under the Montana stars, both of them understood that their relationship had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. What had started as a desperate business arrangement had become something neither of them had expected to find, a partnership that went far deeper than cattle and pastures and ranch management. Tomorrow there would be work to do, decisions to make, and a future to figure out together. But tonight, for the first time since Maya had arrived at Circle K, there were simply Tom and Maya, two people who had found something unexpected and precious in each other. 2 years had passed since that evening on the cabin porch when Tom and Maya first admitted their feelings for each other. The Circle K Ranch had become the most successful operation in the county, but more importantly, it had become a true home. For both of them, their relationship had developed slowly and naturally. After months of working together as partners in both business and life, Tom had proposed to Maya during a quiet moment while they watched the sunrise over the pastures. They had improved together. Maya had said yes without hesitation, knowing that she had found not just a husband, but a true equal partner in every sense of the word. Their wedding had been small and simple, held right there on the ranch with their crew serving as witnesses, and the cattle grazing peacefully in the background. Pete Johnson, Tom's neighbor who had once doubted Maya's abilities, had been honored to officiate the ceremony. Carlos had served as Tom's best man, tears streaming down his face as he watched his beloved boss marry the woman who had taught him so much about ranching. Now, on a crisp autumn morning, Tom stood nervously in the conference room of the Valley Ranchers Association. He had been invited to speak at their annual meeting about the success of the Circle K Ranch. What the audience didn't know was that Tom planned to use this opportunity to address the attitudes and prejudices that he had once shared. Maya sat in the front row, wearing her best dress but still looking like she could manage a cattle roundup at a moment's notice. She gave Tom an encouraging smile as he approached the podium. Around them sat dozens of ranchers from throughout the region, many of whom still held old-fashioned views about women in agriculture. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tom began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. 2.5 years ago, I was about to lose everything. My ranch was failing, my cattle were suffering, and I was too proud and too stubborn to accept the help I desperately needed. He paused, looking directly at Maya. I had convinced myself that ranch work required a certain type of person, someone strong, tough, and uncompromising. In my narrow mind, that meant hiring only men. I actually told the employment agency, "I'll never hire a cowgirl." Those words nearly cost me everything I had worked for. A murmur ran through the audience. Many of these ranchers had heard rumors about Maya's abilities, but few knew the full story of how she and Tom had met. Then Maya Rodriguez applied for my foreman position. She had 10 years of experience, outstanding references, and knowledge that surpassed anyone I had ever interviewed. But when she showed up for the interview, I took one look at her and sent her away without even considering her qualifications. Tom's voice grew stronger as he continued. I was wrong. Not just a little wrong, but completely, devastatingly wrong. Maya didn't just save my ranch, she revolutionized it. She improved our productivity, reduced our costs, and taught my crew techniques that made us all better at our jobs. He gestured toward Maya, who was now blushing slightly at the attention. But her greatest accomplishment wasn't improving our cattle operation or increasing our profits. Her greatest accomplishment was changing my mind about what it really means to be qualified for this work. Tom pulled out a folder filled with documents. Let me share some numbers with you. Since Maya became my ranch manager, our calf survival rate has increased by 23%. Our feed costs have decreased by 18%, while our cattle's health scores have improved across every category. Our breeding program now produces some of the finest cattle in the region. The audience was listening intently now, These were numbers that spoke directly to their concerns as business owners. More importantly, Tom continued, Maya has trained our crew to be more skilled, more safety conscious, and more efficient than ever before. We haven't had a single serious injury in 2 years, compared to 3 hospitalizations in the 2 years before she arrived. An older rancher in the back row raised his hand. Tom, nobody's questioning that your operation is successful. But one woman succeeding doesn't mean all women can handle this work. Tom had expected this objection. You're absolutely right, Frank. One woman succeeding doesn't prove that all women can handle ranch work. But it does prove that we shouldn't automatically assume they can't. Maya's success forced me to examine my assumptions and realize how many qualified people I might have overlooked because of my prejudices. Maya stood up from her seat, and Tom nodded for her to join him at the podium. Several ranchers shifted uncomfortably, not accustomed to hearing from women at these meetings. If I may, Maya said, her voice calm and confident. I understand the concerns about physical demands and safety in ranch work. These are legitimate issues that affect everyone, regardless of gender, but strength comes in many forms. Sometimes the ability to read cattle behavior prevents dangerous situations better than physical force. Sometimes patience and observation accomplish more than aggressive handling techniques. She paused, making eye contact with several audience members. I'm not asking anyone to lower their standards or ignore legitimate job requirements. I'm simply suggesting that you evaluate each candidate based on their actual abilities rather than assumptions about what they can or can't do. Pete Johnson stood up from his seat. I'd like to say something if you don't mind. He walked to the front of the room, his weathered face serious. 3 years ago, I would have agreed with every objection being raised here today. I believed women belonged in the kitchen, not in the cattle pens. Pete looked directly at Maya. Then I watched this young lady handle a difficult calf birth with more skill than I've seen in 30 years of ranching. I watched her calm a 2,000-pound bull that was agitated enough to hurt someone. I've watched her teach techniques to experienced cowboys that made them better at their jobs. He turned back to the audience. Gentlemen and ladies, we have a choice. We can stick to our old ways and potentially miss out on talented people who could improve our operations. Or we can focus on what really matters: knowledge, skill, dedication, and results. An elderly woman in the third row stood up. I've been running my late husband's ranch for 5 years now, ever since he passed. Some of you have been very supportive, but others have suggested I should sell out because ranching is too hard for a woman. I'd like to know where that leaves people like me. The room fell silent. Several ranchers looked uncomfortable. Realizing that their attitudes affected people they knew and respected, Tom stepped back to the microphone. That's exactly the point, Mrs. Henderson. We all know successful female ranchers, veterinarians, and agricultural specialists. Yet somehow we still cling to the idea that this work is only for men. It doesn't make logical sense. Carlos, who had been invited to attend the meeting, asked for permission to speak. I've worked for 4 different ranchers in my career, he sighed. Maya is the best boss I've ever had. She taught me more about cattle handling in 6 months than I learned in the previous 8 years. When I have a problem, she listens. When I make a mistake, she helps me learn from it instead of just yelling at me. He looked around the room. Maybe the question isn't whether women can do ranch work. Maybe the question is whether we're smart enough to recognize good ranch hands when we see them, regardless of what they look like. The meeting continued for another hour, with more discussion and questions. Some ranchers remained skeptical, but others seemed genuinely interested in reconsidering their hiring practices. Several approached Maya afterward to ask specific questions about techniques she had mentioned. As they drove home that evening, Maya reached over and took Tom's hand. That was brave, she said. Speaking out like that couldn't have been easy. Tom squeezed her hand. It was the least I could do. You've changed everything about my life, Maya. Not just the ranch, but the way I think about people, about fairness, about what really matters. He pulled the truck over at their favorite spot overlooking the ranch. In the distance, they could see their cattle grazing peacefully in pastures that they had improved together. The barn and outbuildings looked prosperous and well-maintained. Smoke was rising from the cabin where they had built their life together. "Maya," Tom said quietly, "do you ever regret taking a chance on a stubborn, prejudiced rancher who almost sent you away?" Maya smiled, the same unguarded smile that had first made Tom realize he was falling in love with her. Never, because that stubborn, prejudiced rancher was willing to admit he was wrong and change. That takes more courage than most people ever show. She leaned over and kissed him softly. "Besides, somebody had to teach you that the best ranchers come in all shapes and sizes. I'm just glad I was the one who got to do it." As the sun set over the Circle K ranch, Tom reflected on how completely his life had changed. He had started with the belief that he would never hire a cowgirl. Now he was married to the finest rancher he had ever known, who happened to be a woman. She had become not just his best ranch hand, but his best friend, his partner in every sense, and the love of his life. Sometimes the best things in life come from the places we least expect to find them. Sometimes the people we think we understand the least turn out to be exactly what we need. And sometimes admitting we were wrong opens the door to possibilities we never imagined.